Welcome to Beer Terminology, Section 1. Our first term is additive. Now, additives are enzymes, preservatives, and antioxidants which are added to simplify the brewing process. Now, this can also be an ingredient such as fruit to enhance the flavor profile of the beer. Which brings us now to adjunct. Fermentable material used as a substitute for traditional grains in order to make beer lighter bodied and or cheaper. Now this is very similar to an additive, except that in most cases, adjuncts impact beer more negatively than additives do. Alcohol by volume, or ABV. Now that's the amount of alcohol in beer in terms of percentage in relation to the volume of that beer. ABV is expressed usually as a decimal number to the nearest tenth. Occasionally, though, you will see the percentage listed as ABW, or alcohol by weight. Now, to calculate the ABV from the ABW, if all you're given is the ABW, simply multiply the ABV by 1.25. For example, a 7% ABW is going to translate into a 9% ABV. Now, if you want some comparison, Bud and Bud Light are below 5%. Cigar City High Life, which is their flagship IPA, is 7.5%. Ale. An ale is a beer distinguished by the use of top fermenting yeast strains, more specifically, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. The top fermenting ale yeasts do their work at warmer temperatures than the lager yeast would. Fruitiness and esters are often part of an ale's character. For most of recorded history, the word ale was synonymous with beer. Amber. Any top or bottom fermented beer having an amber color. Well, what that also means is any lager or ale having an amber color. Now, we put this in here because amber beers are great starter beers to introduce newbies to craft beer. They're usually very, very balanced and they lack any extreme flavors that might be intimidating or off-putting to a craft beer novice. Aroma hops. Varieties of hops chosen to impart bouquet. Aroma hops are added late in the boil, usually, and they usually also consist of the noble hop variety, which are typically lower in alpha acids, which makes them great for adding aroma with a less bitter taste. Astringent. A drying, puckering taste that's tannic, can be derived from boiling the grains, long mashing, over sparging, or any other brewing missteps. Now, although this can be an important characteristic of IPAs, astringency in other styles most likely points to flaws within the brewing process of that beer. Bacterial. A general term covering off flavors such as moldy, musty, woody, lactic acid, vinegar, or microbiological spoilage. Keep in mind, though, not all bacteria is bad. You do need certain types, for example, when you're making a sour beer. Barley. A cereal grain that is malted for use in the grist that becomes the mash in the brewing of beer. Now, just as a refresher, as a reminder, there are two types of barley used in brewing, 2-row and 6-row. Now, we'll get to more on that later, but 2-row is the type of barley that's predominantly used by American craft brewers. Barrel. A unit of measurement used by brewers in some countries. For example, in Britain, a barrel holds 36 imperial gallons, which translates to 1.63 hectoliters. Now, no one knows what those numbers mean here in America, so here's some more American numbers for you. In the United States, a barrel holds 31 gallons, so a half barrel, or what you would think of when you think of a typical keg, holds 15.5 gallons. Barrel also can be used to describe a taste on a beer that's been barrel aged. For example, I can really taste the rum barrel, or I can really taste the bourbon barrel in this beer. Body. Thickness and mouth-filling property of a beer, and it can be described as thin or full-bodied. Now, don't fall into the trap of thinking light beers are thin-bodied and dark beers are full-bodied. Guinness, for example, has a thin body compared to its color. Bottle conditioning. Secondary fermentation and maturation in the bottle, creating complex aromas and flavors. This is done by adding a little shot of yeast and or sugar just prior to capping the bottle. Now, doing this allows the beer to further develop over the course of months and even years. In the picture, notice the yeast floaties floating around inside the beer. Caramel, a cooked sugar that is used to add color and alcohol content to beer. It is often used in place of more expensive malted barley. Cask, a closed barrel-shaped container for beer. They come in various sizes and are usually now made of metal. Now, the beer inside a cask is naturally carbonated. The wooden stopper on top is called a bung, and the hole is called the bung hole. I am not kidding. That's really what they're called. Really. Clove-like, a spicy character reminiscent of cloves. It's a characteristic of some wheat beers, or, if excessive, may derive from wild yeast. Conditioning, a period of maturation near the end of the brewing process to impart natural carbonation. Now, warm conditioning further develops complex flavors and aromas. On the other hand, cold conditioning imparts a more clean, rounded taste. Dry hopping. This is the addition of dry hops to fermenting or aging beer to increase its hop character and its aroma. Now, usually this imparts more aroma than it does taste. The hops that were added earlier in the process of the brewing contribute more to the flavor. Ester. It's a volatile flavor compound naturally created in fermentation, often described as fruity, flowery, or spicy. Estery, which is the aroma or flavor reminiscent of flowers or fruit. Obviously, it's very closely related to ester. Now, both ester and estery are common beer tasting descriptors. Fermentation, where the magic happens. This is the conversion of sugars into ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide, which are both byproducts of yeast. Filter, the removal of designated impurities. Yeast in suspension is often targeted for removal. Now, there are different levels of filtration, including fine and sterile. Sterile filtration is something that you would get, say, with a Bud Light or a Miller Lite, where it's completely see-through. Grainy is another common descriptor in beer tasting, which describes a beer tasting like cereal or raw grain. Hang, lingering bitterness or harshness on the tongue. Hard cider, fermented beverage made from apples. Now, because there is no steeping process needed to make cider, it cannot officially be considered a beer because it's not really brewed. The steeping process is what makes you be able to say a beer is brewed. And that concludes Beer Terminology Section 1. Section 2 is coming right up.